Now, happy to welcome Leslie Ann Davidson, retired from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans in Canada, DFO. Leslie Ann was with DFO for 31 years, I think. 20 of those about were devoted to stock assessment and a whole suite of other scallop-related efforts. And again, one of the people who was so important to our development as collaborators in Maine, and we're just so glad to have you here. Thank you.
Sarah. Thank you for having me here. It's a real honor. As he said, I'm retired, and hey, you guys still want me. So, our work started like in, I was employed in 1983, and back then, in the area that I was employed, I didn't realize the stocks had already been depleted. Oh, I'm the wrong way. So today I'm only going to talk about the enhancement, but I did a lot of work with aquaculture as well. So if you have questions on aquaculture, you can ask them later. And when I was first employed, we did assessment, and then we continued doing assessment. We sort of had a break, and then we did aquaculture and we did enhancement. So 31 years just on scallops. And before that, I did work on all kinds of other studies on like deer surveys and bug surveys and stuff like that. So I've been a biologist for all my life. So on the East Coast, we have two species of scallops. We have the Placopecten magellanicus, which in the literature you'll see them as sea scallops, or giant sea scallops. And we also have the Chlamys islandicus, which is the Iceland scallop. But for the enhancement, we only worked with the sea scallop. Now, in Canada, for management reason, every area is separated in different region, like for management purposes of the fishery. Now, where I work is in the Gulf region. And there was another study done on enhancement that was in the Quebec region. I don't have a pointer to show where the different regions are, but you're probably more familiar with the Maritime region, which have the Georges Banks and Digby scallops, and those areas there are very productive, and they were not interested in doing enhancement work because they're doing well enough to continue without having some input. But in our area, like in the Gulf region, like I said, back in 83 when I first employed, it was already depleted. And in the Quebec region, only around the Magdalen Islands, they were interested in scallop enhancement. So in the Gulf region, we started our studies in 1990 and same in the Quebec region. And you're sort of wondering why 1990s? Well, I'll tell you, there's this great report that was done by the Japanese. It's the Fisheries Journal, number 34. And in there, there is everything you wanted to know. And it's still up to date, even nowadays. So if you guys don't have a copy of that, I think you should because it's well documented and well reported. So we did initial studies, and that would be like spat collection and growth rates and reproduction. And then we, like, it's so political, everything. At one point, I'm working also on the west coast of Newfoundland. I'm working around Nova Scotia and very different areas. And then they would change where I would study. But I got information on many different parts, but um, in the initial studies. But then in year 2000 to 2008, there was a small scale enhancement project in the Gulf region where I worked, but I was in close collaboration with the people in Quebec region, and they had funding for a commercial scallop enhancement project, but it only went from year 2000 to 2007. So 2007, 2008, that's a long time ago. What happened? Are Canadians still are doing enhancement now? That's a good question. But first, before I go into that, I'd like to tell you about the successes that we had in the work that we did and the knowledge that we acquired that hopefully I'll be able to transfer it to you and you'll have the success that I wish we had. Now, to start in our Gulf region, I just want to show you where the fishermen are fishing, and this is according to the logbooks. And as you see, there is fishermen from New Brunswick, fishermen from PEI, fishermen from Nova Scotia, and they all have different fishing areas, but PEI and New Brunswick share some of the same areas, especially in what we call Area 22. Why that's important to point out is because when you have fishermen from two different areas, guess what? Yeah, there's lots of infighting. So in the end, in the Gulf region, we ended up doing enhancement work in the Baie de Chaleur and off the Miramichi and in the Northumberland Strait. And I have it in French, and that Détroit means a strait, like the Northumberland Strait. So they selected very small areas, 1 kilometer square, to do their enhancement work. And so that is such a small project among the scallop beds where the scallop fisheries continued. But in the Quebec region, they were a lot more proactive. They took in consideration all of the scallop beds and they closed major section of their beds, and all of the fishermen from Magdalen Islands were participating in the project. And so, unlike in the Gulf region, only a handful were participating in the project. Now, we did have success. We're throughout the years, we were able to maximize all the efficiency for spat collection. That's where maybe if you have questions on spat collection, I can help you. And we did the spawning monitoring, we did plankton monitoring, we developed efficient collection gear, and also we did many, many different studies on the timing and deployment and retrieving of the collectors. And we also practiced different husbandry practices for releasing the spat on the bed. So we tried different things. In the end, both in the Gulf region and the Quebec region, we were able to demonstrate that the density on the commercial size scallops were effectively increased. Now I'll just give you a few details. Here, just to show you the life cycle of the scallops and the spat collection. We have your male and your female scallops, the gametes in the water column for about 4 weeks, and then they go down and they try to attach to whatever. And so that's where we collect them on our collectors. And I used to talk to mostly give presentation to fishermen, and I would say way back then there was a song called Hotel California, and I'd say you can come in but you can never leave, because as they grow they can't leave. And even the size of the mesh, we studied that too, if you want later on to know what was our ideal mesh size. So there's males and females. The females are pink gonads and the males are white. How we did our spawning monitoring, we did the gonosomatic index. We would select 30 adult scallops, and why 80 millimeters or greater is adult, that's another study. And so we did this weekly, and the gonosomatic index is the ratio between the weight of the gonad and the total soft tissue weight, and which includes the gonad. So here I have an example of what the gonosomatic index, but this is only for 2 months. You could do it throughout the year if you want, but we thought like the last 2 months were the most important. And as you see, sometimes the gonad weighs as much as 30% of the soft tissue. And why we did this is because as soon as there was a drop, as you can see at the end of August, that meant to us there's spawning occurred. And this varied only by a week or so every year. But as soon as the spawning occurred, then we gave ourselves 4 weeks, and then we would deploy our collectors. Now, if there was let's say, a bad weather on the day that we were supposed to collect and even if it's bad weather for 3 or 4 days or even a week, not a problem. Wait till it's nice and calm, because believe it or not, the larvae in the water column are still in the water column when there's bad weather. They also wait to settle on your collectors. Um, so in the plankton monitoring, as you've seen this life cycle, all different stages as well, we did quite a few of the monitoring of the plankton. There's your decel, and then later on, when they're in perivelure ready to go down, we knew it was the right time to put our collectors. But monitoring the plankton is very expensive, time consuming, so we only did it for a little while and we discontinued that. But one of the interesting study, we had monitored the plankton throughout our area, and as you see in between PEI and New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, that area is called the Northumberland Strait. There was quite a few um, plankton, scallop plankton or scallop larvae. But when we put our collectors, and here's a sample of our collector, we used many different kinds. We did a whole bunch of studies on what's most efficient and the color and everything. And we ended up that the best collector for us was only 2 pieces of stiff netron in the collector with a larger mesh bag. We like the 2 to 3 millimeter mesh bag. That worked the best for us. So I would put out these test collection gear. We had 3 little bags down with little blocks of cement, but I put it out and then only retrieve it only a month later. And then I was able to count the number of scallop spat. And lo and behold, you notice that in the Northumberland Strait, hardly anything in the collectors, even though there was a lot of plankton. So just because there's a lot of plankton doesn't mean you're going to be collecting there. So we done many other studies, and we concluded that the best sites for collection for our area, and maybe it's applicable everywhere, is between 90 and 120 feet, and not between 2 land masses, because between 2 land masses, we found there's a lot of silt. The silt goes on the collectors, and the next thing you know, there's no room for the scallops. We also avoided navigational channels and areas where there is strong or severe, strong currents or severe storms. Now, we did experience lots of gear loss, but then we figured out a way to prevent that. So when we started constructing the spat collectors and deploying the lines, we have like a little assembly line, and it was done in a local arena. And then the collectors were put on a boat, and then they were later deployed. Now, we tried many different ways, but this is what we ended up to be the best for us. We had the collectors in a V shape with a little weight and the lowest collector was 6 feet from the bottom, And depending on how many we had, it might have been only 20 feet from the bottom for the top one. And see, we have two surface buoys, but that was only for a little while because, see, we have ice. So we had to remove the surface buoys. But in the spring, we would grapple and put our buoys back up just to find them, or we could wait a little longer, but as long as we could grapple them and pull them back up. And like here, I said that the site had to be at least 100 feet. Now, why I say at least 100 feet is because the deeper you are, the less you're going to get unwanted species like mussels, hyatellas, and like jingle shells and other things. Um, so when came time to harvest, oh, that's the other thing too. In our area, because we wanted to do everything as cheaply as possible, we would deploy um, in the fall, but we would only retrieve in the fall. So we were looking to have only about 2,000 spat per bag, but we wanted mostly scallop. And after many trials and tribulations, we figured out a way how to have mostly scallop spat, which was in the following October or November when we would retrieve them. And then when we retrieved them, we would do all of the cleaning on board on the ship. We'd have these great big vats with a basket it put inside, and then the basket we put the we put the content in, clean it out, and all the mud and everything would go to the bottom, and the scallop spat would stay in the basket. And when we would pour directly from the basket onto the water. Now, we did this when the waters were calm, and if it was an area where there is a lot of current, we do it at slack tides. And one thing that we found very important is the air temperature. We like to keep it less than 10 degrees, but above freezing. So between 2 and 10 degrees was our air temperature, because the scallops really are kind of slow moving at that time. And if it's colder than 2 degrees, or even, let's say, if the air temperature is like -1, that's detrimental to the scallops. So we wanted, so we usually we aim for about between 5 and 10, but if it was like 2, then we'd live with it, kind of thing. So the air temperature was very important as well for us. Now, the Quebec region, they had a lot more money. Okay, 5 minutes. Yeah, they had a lot more money. And so they were a lot more collectors, and they would bring their collectors in, sort them. You know that sorting machine that you guys saw at Ronnie Bruto's? That was purchased and created while it was by the Quebec region. They hired, I think it was a Dutch engineer, and he created it, and they purchased that one. And then later on, they had another one, even better made, and that one was sold to our group of fishermen, the first one. And then the one that we sold to Ronnie Boudreau, so it made its way. Now, and because they were sorting them, they had beautiful, clean scallops to put down. And in our area, we did all our surveys with video cameras because our areas were so small. If we would have used a drag, we would have just dragged them all up. And so we were able to show the increase in the population of the adult scallops. But we also saw that there was lots of starfish. So we tried the mop, like probably other people had tried. We got the idea from Magdalen Islands, who got the ideas from the Japanese. It works beautifully, but to get rid of the starfish that are on the mop, you have to dump them in hot water, and that's kind of a little bit dangerous. But we only did it once. It works really well, but we didn't continue doing it because of cost. We did show that from our video cameras, like the fishing sites where in our area had only 0.1 to 1.6 calls per meter square. And on the seeded beds, when we had started, because the fishermen had chosen the beds because they weren't fishing there, they had started at like 0.0 0.04, 0.02, 0.009. So they had really given us completely depleted bed. But I also want to point out, in 1968, there was a survey that was done. This is long before I was employed, that the scallop density had been as high as 4 scallops per meter square. So you can understand how depleted the scallop beds are in our area. So in the Quebec region, they did a wonderful job at monitoring what came from the wild fishery, what came from the enhancement, and what came from seeded scallops. So both, in conclusion, both regions were, it showed that there was a positive result. Scallop enhancement does work. Now, I just want to put a little word on the passive enhancement. I had tried using it with fuzzy rope, and I didn't was not able to complete the study all the way because of the controversy, but it did show that the fuzzy ropes do collect the scallops spat, and the hope is after it's collected, it will fall to the bottom and passively enhance. Now, here's the reason why we're not doing it in Canada. All of the work was done under research permit. And when the work was done and the money that came in to do the work, the managers and the fishermen did not want to change the regulations. They didn't want to change the management plan, and the industry did not want to change their habits. So they could never incorporate the enhancement activity. So it was discontinued. But all the work that we did, we can transfer the information to you, and hopefully you will be very successful in all the work that you do. Thank you.